All right, we are now beginning Faust Part 2. And here we're starting with this image of from Caspar David Friedrich, which is a landscape painting from about 1809 or thereabouts of a rainbow and a lone sort of Faustian figure in a charming landscape, as this opening section is called. Now, with regard to Part 2 is divided into 5 acts, whereas Part 1 did not have any acts. It simply bounced from one scene to the next. Did not have the traditional Shakespearean breakdown into 5 acts. Most of Shakespeare's plays are broken into 5 acts. This one is, and Act 1 is composed of 7 scenes, and in this video we'll talk about the first 2, Charming Landscape and Imperial Residence. Now, with regard to Charming Landscape here, this scene is a prologue, and it's meant to rhyme with the prologue in Heaven, in particular, at the beginning of Faust Part 1. And here it says, Faust, bedded on a flowery mead, weary, restless, seeking sleep. Twilight is approaching. Twilight, a ring of spirits, graceful little shapes, floating and weaving. And then so we have Ariel, who is singing a song to the accompaniment of Aeolian harps. And of course, Ariel is a character from, as we've already seen, from The Tempest, from Shakespeare's last play, The Tempest. And the only really connecting link of this scene is to Ariel appearing at the end of the Walpurgis Night's dream, where he says, whether nature bountiful or spirit give you pinions, that is to say wings, track me lightly up the hill to the rose dominions. And here he's Faust now is lying, trying to get to sleep at sunset in a meadow, a flowery meadow. And Ariel now begins to sing this song. So Ariel, as his name implies, in The Tempest was the spirit of the air and of weather. Prospero, the character there who is based on John Dee, the magus, the magician, they've been washed ashore onto an island which Shakespeare associated with the New World. And he sends Ariel out to cause a storm that causes a shipwreck that contains his rivals from Naples on board to be washed up so he can deal with them. So Shakespeare borrows Ariel then. So this is the only connecting link. And Mephistopheles is notably absent from this scene. We don't know where he is. We don't know how Faust got here. We don't know what he's doing here on this charming meadow. But I want to read this because it's pretty intricate the way Goethe does this. So Ariel sings a song where he says, when the vernal blossom showers, vernal meaning the spring equinox, so we're just after May Day here. When the vernal blossom showers, wafting sink on all the earth, and the fields their verdant dowers shine to all of mortal birth. Elfin power of fairies dainty hies to help where help it can, be he wicked, be he saintly, pitying the luckless man. Ye who surround this head with aerial wheeling, here prove the noble elfin way of healing, soothe now the wearied heart's contention dire, withdraw the searing arrows of remorse, of horrors suffered, cleanse his soul entire. So in other words, Ariel is in charge of this spirit of fairies, or elves, I suppose, who are surrounding Faust. He's having trouble getting to sleep. So Ariel brings them in and says, this man's soul needs healing, let's put him to sleep. Gert always has this idea that sleep is the best thing you can do for healing wounds. Many times throughout his plays and poetry, he has characters who go to sleep, and then they wake up refreshed. And then 4 are the vigils of the night's dim course. So now, this number 4, whereas Part 1 opened with 3, and then with the 3 theater people, and then added a 4th with the 3 angels, Gabriel, then Raphael, then Michael, and then added Mephistopheles as the 4th. This one begins with 4, namely the 4 watches of the night. And then there were also 4 watches of the day. So in the traditional religious calendar, the day was divided into 8 watches of 3 hours each. And so we have a 4 for night, 4 for day. So we have a mandala. In both cases, we have 2 mandalas that the epic begins with. Part 2 it's impossible to think of it as a play, as you'll see. It's an epic in and of itself. Whereas I think Part 1 can be considered a play, Part 2 cannot. And then we'll see another mandala up here in the second scene here with the Imperial residence throne room. So this begins with a series of mandalas with 4 folds, which Jung would regard as images of totality and wholeness, images of completion. And to continue with Ariel's song, he says, So help this guy get to sleep. 4 are the vigils of the night's course. With kindly care to plenish them conspire. First rest his head upon the cooling pillow, then bathe him in the dew of Lethe's bourne. So it's as though Ariel is saying, let's put him to sleep and it'll wash away all memory of Gretchen. And there are no references then to Gretchen until the end again, or near the end. And soon the cramp and rigored limbs grow willow. As strengthened he will rest against the morn. Do fairest duty of the sprite, return him to the sacred light. And then a chorus of these fairies gathers round him, and Goethe divided this into 4 different verses, each one corresponding to one of the watches of the night, beginning with 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., which is called Serenade, and then in the second verse, the Notturno, which is 9 p.m. to midnight. The third verse corresponds to Mattuno, which is midnight to 3 a.m., and then finally, the fourth verse corresponds to Réveillé, which is 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. And so Faust is now being put to sleep. And so the chorus goes, now this chorus scene should then rhyme with the prologue in heaven, with the chorus that begins there at the beginning of Faust Part 1, where we saw Gabriel, then Raphael, then Michael gathered around the throne of God and singing a chorus there. So this is homologous to that. Only this is a chorus of Nordic deities or divinities or elemental spirits. And they sing, when an aerial mildness vagrant, green embowered lowland rings, swathing mists and ambience fragrant, dusk in its descending brings. Languor dulcet, lisping lowly, lulls the heart to child's repose. On the weary sufferer, slowly these diurnal portals close, which is sunset now. Notturno. Night has sunk already, darkling, ranking star on holy star, lambent lantern, tiny sparkling, shimmer near and glimmer far. There in cloudless night a glimmer, mirrored here in watery plains, sealing blissful rest, the shimmer of the moon in splendor reigns. So 9 p.m., the moon is up in the sky. Mattino, midnight. Rueful hours are fading, ending. Ache and bliss are washed away. Bode it now, already mending. Trust the newly pledging day. Vales are greening, hillocks swelling, bushes shady rest afford, and in plant silver welling, crops are swaying harvestward. And so the vales are greening because as Faust is sleeping, a rainstorm goes across the meadow, and it's raining on the valley, making it verdant. And then so Réveillé is 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. Send your gaze to yonder brightness. Wish on wish at will to reap. You are cradled but in lightness. Cast it off the shell of sleep. Scruple not to be audacious as the doubting rabble gasp. All is open to the gracious who perceive and swiftly grasp. Then their song is sandwiched by Ariel, who comes back in again. A stupendous clangor proclaims the approach of the sun now. Ariel. Hark, the storm of hours rounding, clear to spirit ear rebounding, knell of day's renewal sounding. Granite portals groan and clatter, wheels of Phoebus roll and spatter. What great din the dawning brings, trumpet blaring and fanfaring, ears bedazing, eyes beglaring. Fear to hear unheard of things, blossom clusters seek to hide in, deep in sheltered hush abiding. Down the crags beneath the leaf, if it strikes you, you are deaf. And then so Faust awakens. And now, originally this was written first. This monologue of Faust here, which is meant to then correspond to the monologue that he gives at the opening of the play with Night, where he's alone and depressed in his study. Here he's not depressed now. He's refreshed from the night. It's springtime. But the opening section that we just read was written in 1827, and this monologue by Faust was written actually first, 1826. So he went back and added that to make it rhyme with the prologue in heaven, with the 3 angels singing their chorus. And so now we have Faust in 4 verses, corresponding symbolically to the 4 watches of the day, which is Prima, Tertia, Sexta, and Nona, starting with Prima 6 a.m. at dawn to 9 a.m., but this all happens at dawn, so it only corresponds to these 4 watches symbolically, but they're meant to rhyme with the 4 watches of the night. And the first word he says is revived, which links back to réveillé. Réveillé means revived. And that would have been the opening word of Faust Part 2 if he had left it there, revived. After the horrors of the Gretchen tragedy, now he's reborn. But Goethe went back and added this section in. He's reborn because all the fairies have gathered around him and put sleep on him. and made him forget. He says, revived, life's pulse is throbbing, fresh and heady, gently to greet the dawn's ethereal wreathing. This night too, earth, you have persisted steady, and, newly quickened, at my feet are breathing. Fresh joy to grant you have already striven, already set resolve astir and seething, toward peaks of being to be ever driven. This is written, by the way, in terza rima, which is the same rhyme scheme that Dante uses in his Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. In luminous haze the world would pierce its cover. The woods resound to myriad notes of living. Down clefts and vales where drifts of vapor hover, cerulean clarity is downward seeping, and twigs and branches, freshly laved, recover from fragrant depths of their enchanted sleeping, where leaf and petal drip from dewy shower, now hue on hue from somber ground are leaping, and all about me turns to Eden's bower. So he has this outward exhalation into the macrocosm, into the world of nature that is around him. Second stanza, raise up your gaze. The mountain titans waken, swift to proclaim the consecrated hour. Of deathless lucence they have first partaken, before the day to lowlands here inclined it. But now the Alps' green slants have also shaken the dusk, for gleam and contour newly minded, and light descends triumphant, stepwise darting. He clears the rim. In other words, the sun is poking up over the rim. Alas, already blinded, I turn aside, my mortal vision smarting. So he tries to look directly at the sun, but its gaze is too bright for him, so he has to turn away. And this is the human encounter with the divine, which is too bright to encounter directly as far as Goethe is concerned, and it has to be stepped down and mediated by art and culture. The function of art and culture in this monologue for Goethe is to step down the impacts of the divine so that it is digestible by the human mind. Third stanza. Thus also, as we yearningly aspire and find at last fulfillment's portals parting, run within tender reach our prime desire, there will erupt from those eternal porches, dumbfounding us, exorbitance of fire. This would correspond, by the way, to sexta, which is noon to 3, when the sun is at its most powerful. We only meant to kindle up life's torches, and flame engulfs us, seas of torrid blazes. Love, hatred, which envelops us and scorches, since pain and joy in vast alternate phases, till we gaze back upon our homely planet, and shelter in most young of youthful hazes. Then we have nona, which is 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., when the sun's power begins to weaken, and here it weakens because now the power of the divine has to be stepped down with a rainbow. Hence the Friedrich painting here with the rainbow. So, he says, sun and back, my eye too weak to scan it, I rather follow with entrancement growing. The cataract, which is a waterfall, the cataract that cleaves the jagged granite from fall to fall in thousand leaps, outthrowing a score of thousand streams, and its revolving, from upflung foam, a soaring lacework blowing. But in what splendor from the storm evolving, vaults up the shimmering arc in variance lasting, now purely limed and now in air dissolving, a cooling fragrance all about it casting. This mirrors all aspiring human action. On this your mind for clearer insight fasten, that life is ours by colorful refraction. So there are a number of meanings here. One is the rainbow that God sends after he destroys man in the Old Testament with a flood, and sends a rainbow indicating that he will never do it again, and it's a rebirth of humanity after he wipes everyone out with the flood. So there is that. So this is a new covenant here and a rebirth for Faust. And it also refers to, in alchemy, and there's a ton now of alchemical references here. Goethe works in alchemy more and more as he goes along. This corresponds to the cauda pavonis, which means the peacock's tail of colors that appears in alchemy, which signifies the rebirth of the metals after they have been melted down and volatilized, and then they give off a little rainbow hue. It also refers to Iris, whose symbol is the rainbow, and she is the messenger of the gods, just as Ariel here, in a way, plays the role of messenger of the gods to Faust. Even though he's been asleep the whole time that Ariel has been talking to him here, he's not heard Ariel consciously. And then, of course, we also have Goethe's color theory, which by this point, he had published, this is 1826 that he wrote this, which by this point, he's published his color theory in 1810, in which he has this idea, which rejects Newton's idea that colors are simply wavelengths. They are not wavelengths. And Newton came up with this silly idea by holding up a prism to white light, and within the prism, then you can see the light split up into this rainbow of colors. No, you can't. That's not what happens. Goethe tried this himself. You hold up a prism he held it up to a white wall and he saw nothing. And what he began to figure out was that no, colors are not contained in white light. White light is fundamentally invisible until it strikes a medium. Once it strikes a medium, in this case being the prism is a darkening medium, then it enables colors to come into being, because colors come into being as the interaction between the primary phenomenon of light versus darkness. Light's invisible till it hits matter, till it hits a medium. You shine a light in a smoky room and you can see a beam of light. You shine a laser at a rock concert through pot smoke that's everywhere, then you see the laser light. It always has to hit particles in order for it to be visible. With a sunset, the light is going through particles that are in the atmosphere, which make it visible. So there is no such thing as a spectrum of colors being contained in pure white light. Pure white light is invisible. It's colorless. It requires darkness to make it visible. That's point number one with Goethe's color theory. And point number two is that the two primordial colors are yellow and blue. These are the two fundamental colors because Goethe noticed that when you look at a prism, Newton's prism, let's say, there are colors missing from it that he was able to find, such as magenta, such as pale yellow, and a bunch of different colors that are not accounted for in Newton's theory. Newton was wrong, that's a fact. And then with yellow and blue, which are the primordial colors, their mixing and interaction produces then green. Green is the product of yellow and blue, and the opposite of green is magenta, or reddishness, as it moves toward red. And so he says that the darker colors, the blue colors and violet and purple, the darker colors are produced through light striking matter and producing darker colors, whereas the lighter colors, the yellows, the reds, and so forth, are produced through light on top of darkness. So this is Goethe's color theory, and it's implicit here in his rainbow, that the rainbow is produced through the sunlight hitting the drops of rain. It has to hit matter in order for it to create a visible rainbow, which for him is symbolic of the divine being stepped down through the rainbow of human art, which steps it down and creates a display of beauty that is awe-inspiring and catches your breath. All right, so now in the next scene, which is the Imperial residence scene, now we have the Emperor, and all of a sudden, Faust actually isn't in this scene, but both Faust and Mephistopheles are now all of a sudden at an emperor's court, and he doesn't specify the emperor. He leaves it generic, which is good, but originally it was the Emperor Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire, and that's who this is supposed to be, but Goethe doesn't name him. Goethe was involved with international politics, so there are reasons why he doesn't name him. So, as in the Faust book of 1587 and in Marlowe's play, Faust then goes to visit the court of Emperor Charles V, and so Goethe still here is faithful to the original narrative in having them, all of a sudden they're just at the emperor's court, in which now the emperor is holding audience, and the first thing he does is point out that his jester is missing. He's like, where's my jester? And then, of course, it's because Mephistopheles has taken his role and kicked him out. So Mephistopheles shows up at the emperor's court now, not yet Faust, but he's around, shows up and has taken his place. And so the emperor asks to hear from him. Now note then that this scene too also is meant to rhyme with the prologue in heaven. Let's see here. So we have here's Mephistopheles kneeling here, right here in front of the emperor. And now note that with the prologue in heaven, note how this rhymes with Mephistopheles here in front of God, surrounded by his courtiers. And so that's what it's meant to rhyme with, the prologue in heaven. Here we have Mephistopheles now appearing once again as a court jester in front of not God, but God on earth, the Holy Roman Emperor. And so he's kicked out the jester, and the emperor appears here with this astrologer, whom Mephistopheles simply turns into his puppet and makes him speak. And then we have complaints about how bad the economic situation is here in the land of the Holy Roman Empire. It's terrible. So we have another mandala. This would be the next set of four, the third, in which four different of the emperor's courtiers step forward to complain about this sort of Kali Yuga of economic disaster that is taking place in the realm. First, we have the chancellor who steps forth and complains about the disintegration of lawfulness and how even judges are corrupt now, and they're giving people guilty sentences that don't deserve them and so forth. Then we have the quartermaster, whose task is to handle military logistics, steps forth and talks about how mercenary soldiers are on the loose and impatiently demanding their pay. We don't have any money to pay them. And then the treasurer steps forth and complains about runaway inflation. The ports of gold are tightly jammed. Each one has scraped and raked and crammed, but our exchequer is to let. So the treasury is a mess. And then finally the marshal steps forward to complain about how bad the economy really is. Where he says, the cooks and scullions need not fear of boar and stag, of hare and deer, of ducks and geese and Gallic hens. Allowances in kind, fixed rents. There's still an inflow of a sort. But wine at last is running short, where cask on cask the vaults would stow us, prime vintages of premier growers. My lord's relentless swillings show us the final barrels drop. The city council has to draw its pegs. We're down to jugs and bowls from kegs. Beneath the table lies the sop. I am to settle all accounts. The Jew will not rebate an ounce. Liens and attachments will pronounce, which swallow up the next year's crop. The swine are short of fattening forage. We sleep on pillows under mortgage. At table serve premasticated bread. And then the emperor looks at Mephistopheles and he says, and you, fool, have no tale of woe to add? And then Mephistopheles volunteers, oh, not I. To see the radiance effused by you and yours, subtly mocking them. Could confidence be bruised where sovereignty brooks no insolence, where instant force stands ready for defense, where goodwill acts, braced by intelligence, and bounteous energy instructed by good sense? What could toward misadventure be combining, or gloom where galaxies like these are shining? So he's making fun of them. And then he tells them, well, I have a plan, and this is going to turn out to be the introduction of paper currency to try and solve the problems. And so note that the marshal has already talked about their concrete economy, which isn't barter, it's actually commercial capitalism, where you trade ready-made goods, such as ducks and geese and hens and wine and so forth. You trade ready-made goods, not manufactured goods. But now it's a concrete economy based on the trade of concrete things. But now Mephistopheles is going to propose shifting it to an abstract economy of paper currency, and he's going to fuck up the whole economy even worse. But he says here, now first, before any mention of the paper, that doesn't happen in this chapter. He says, well, there's treasure buried in your land, and I know where it's at. And isn't it written that any treasure found in the land ruled over by the emperor de facto belongs to the emperor? Well, I happen to know where some gold can be found. All we need is some plows and such to dig it up, and we'll have access to that gold. And he intends the gold to become a gold standard backing the paper currency. It doesn't work. It's a disaster. But number one, it's a reference to mining and metallurgy. That's point number one. And point number two, it's also a reference to alchemy. This is an alchemical opus, as Jung pointed out correctly. And just as the gold will be extracted from the land by Faust and Mephistopheles for the emperor, so too with alchemy, the goal is to extract the gold from the metals, from the base metals like lead and tin and whatever the base metals are that are, as it were, that have gold implicit within them. And if you just know the correct formulae for transubstantiating these metals to pull the gold out, then you've got the gold. This, of course, was not literally true. Alchemists weren't literally, except maybe stupid ones, weren't literally trying to extract gold from metals. Ours is not the common gold, they say. But the symbolic gold of the spirit, their paradigm was that the spirit is symbolized by gold and it's trapped in matter. And alchemy consists in the process of putting matter through transmutations in order to liberate the spirit in an epiphany of the spirit, which is exactly the opposite to the Christian Catholic worldview, in which spirit and matter are totally opposed. Spirit is not in matter, and the closest you get is the transubstantiation of the wine and the wafer in the Eucharist through the magic of the Mass into the body and blood of Christ. That's the gold that's transubstantiated there. But matter itself does not contain spirit. Matter is fallen, and everything that has come from the material world and from nature is fallen. There is no spirit in it. Spirit comes down from the descent of the Logos from above. And the alchemists were considered in some cases heretical for this idea that the spirit is located within matter. You just have to know the correct formulae for making it manifest and visible. And so, so that's the allegory of here then Goethe is setting all this up now for an extraction of the gold from the land. And this sets up also the entire plot machinery for part 2, which takes place in the Emperor's world and in his wars with other armies, other kingdoms. And you could say that, astrologically considered, we could say that part 1 is best symbolized by Venus in Cancer, which is to say the erotic in the domestic sphere. Cancer has to do with the domestic sphere. But part 2, on the other hand, is concerned with Mars in Capricorn. Capricorn is 180 degrees opposite Cancer, and whereas Cancer has to do with the domestic sphere, Capricorn has to do with the government. And here we're dealing with Mars, not Venus. We're done with Venus, except when Helen of Troy comes up. But the second book is all about wars and how Faust and Mephistopheles sort of try to become statesmen in the employ of the emperor, serving him and trying to help him win these battles, and all they do is make everything worse and create huge messes. All right, so next up is the Carnival, and we'll look at that. It's a very long section, so that's next.